Okay, so we can start. Great. Um, Hi, dear colleagues. My name is Alexei. I'm a web developer, and recently, not so long ago, maybe a year ago or a year and a half, I started to write code using Vue.js framework with Vue router and Vuex for state management. And today I'm going to tell you about some not usual way of data rendering in Vue. Well, the title of my presentation can be a little bit frustrating, but I'll tell you what does it mean very soon. So let me start from the agenda. And first, we're going to talk about the use case, which can be a part of your real requirements in your real projects. Then we will talk about solution proposed. Beware that my presentation contains a lot of code samples and unfortunately just a few pictures. So as Obi-Wan said, like, patience. Okay, let's go. So here's our use case. As a real user, I want everything to be cached and cache must be up to date. It's a really rare case when user says something like this. However, caching is often used in real projects. Asterisk near the up-to-date word says that we're not going to describe cache update mechanism in details in this presentation. We just believe that there is some mechanism. Great. And we have a constraint in addition to the only use case we have. To make all the responses lightweight, API we fetch data from uses references. What is reference? Let's imagine that we have interface address model which contains ID, city, and state name. And we have another one model called person, which contains ID, name, and address. And here address is a nested model. So the example of response from the API, person model, can look like this. So we can see the ID, we can see the name, and we can see the address model, but not the whole model, but just a reference. It contains ID on the real model from another module from our store, for example. So this is the reference. And let's continue with caching description in terms of JS code. Caching belongs to good coding practices. On the first code sample, you can start getting acquaintance with how caching can be implemented in Vue, of course, with Vuex projects. By the way, this code sample is the largest one in my presentation, so you can look at it and relax. It's the most complex part, and you are in a moment to pass it through. So, on the left, you can see a structure of our stores. To be precise, a structure of our state. So, our state contains just two fields, promise map and models. Promise map is just an object which has IDs of models as keys, and promises which are resolved with those models as values. And models array is just models array. So models array contains models with ID and some other information, but significant for us is an ID. So, and on the right, you can see a method get, which uses caching. Of course, you may say that real projects have modular stores, and this code sample is too simple. You're right, you're absolutely right, but it's good enough to understand the main idea of how caching can be implemented. Here you can see that we're going to check if the promise map contains needed information. If no, we're going to fetch that information and put that promise into promise. Method get works. So the second, our prerequisite, is a standard interface we are going to use for our actions. Maybe it would be better to call these two not prerequisites but preconditions, as we just accept them as they are. However, you can see here method get, which was described on our previous slide, and methods which respectively allows you to add new models to the store, to update models in the store, and to delete models from the store. Great. So we already get acquaintance with the structure of our store, and now we can go to the description of our solution we're going to propose in this presentation. And here is a brief description. So we are going to organize the data loading and rendering using some standard interface for all components. And our solution must address component rendering before the data is loaded. It must address reference handling. We were talking about those references. And it must address some special operations. And I'm going to mention them a little bit later. Great. So, and here on the 8th slide, there is an answer. What is that magical word async rendering? So async rendering, it's just a solution which combines caching and lazy loading with some placeholder values for rendering data before it's available on the client, and solve some view-specific issues for this case. Yeah, quite long for a presentation title, isn't it? But that is why async rendering. So, what are the view-specific issues or concerns I mentioned about on the previous slide? So the first one, concern, and the largest one, I think, it's reactivity. Reactivity, one of the greatest features Vue proposes to us, and unfortunately, it has some concerns. This is a quotation from the Vue official site. And you can see here that Vue is not perfect in reactivity, is not perfect in terms that JavaScript cannot detect some changes we can do on our object. To be precise, Vue cannot detect property deletion or property addition. Some of you may say that, well, ES6 brought amazing functionality which allows us to do that, which allows us to intercept any actions on the object and to intercept setting the property, getting the property, to adding the property and removal. It's a proxy. And you're absolutely right. Vue 3 promises to introduce that functionality into its reactivity system, and then the reactivity will be perfect. But now we still have to take into account this concern. And second one concern is data rendering. This is a code snippet from official Vue router documentation. So the main idea, they propose to use vif for rendering the data which isn't loaded yet. Let's go through this example step by step. So if you have several states, you can have state like loading, you have state you can have state error, and you can have state fetched data. So on the first step, while the data is loading, you can show something like this, like spinner, busy indicator, like it's loading. If something went wrong, you can show the message, oh, unfortunately. And at last, when the data is loaded, you can show the data itself. Like in our case, it's a table of students and their universities. What does it mean for us? It means for us that we can have these two extra steps to handle while our data is loading. And of course, it's more a question of how do you want to implement your components? How do you want to separate the functionality? Maybe you want to really add this into your component to make it really like standalone, really independent one, and so on and so forth. But maybe you want to introduce some global components which are responsible for showing that spinner, for showing these error messages or any messages you want somewhere in global layout. So in our case, we do not want to use vif, but we want to use the data we already have and then load the data like step by step if we need it. Great. So And now we can start using of our solution on the component level. Here is the easiest case of how we can do it on the component level. We created getModel method, which solves two tasks for us. The first, it allows us to pass some default values to the component. Look at the default model. Here, method view.set takes care of reactivity concern. So any property which is added to the object with view set will be reactive. And yeah, that is how we ensure the reactivity is preserved. The second one, task, this method loads any data which is still not available on the client yet. So we check if we have that model using our get method, which is described previously on our previous slides. And if the data is available, we'll get that data. If the data is not available, we are going to load it. Please pay attention that after all async operation is done, component cache will contain exactly the same promise as our promise map in the store. It means that we may not worry about keeping the cached copies of data up to date, because there's only one instance of data, and that's important. Okay, let's look at our examples. In the simplest case, we have something like a model, for example, student, which contains another one, nested model, university. And we need to render table with student name and university name columns. That is how we can use our solution. We use v4 directive for rendering of table row element, and inside of for, we can use getProperty method. I didn't add the code for getProperty method, but you easily can imagine how it works on base of getModel method, which we described on our previous slide. We just pass as a parameter the name of field where we have a reference model, and we passed the original one, the original model. Then we can get name of our university, even if university isn't loaded yet. So in this concrete case, while the data is loading, you will see empty university column. How to get predefined value there? Just as easy as on previous slide. We add one more parameter to getProperty method, the default value for university model. And that is how it works. Let's look at a little bit more complex case. We have two levels of nesting. For example, we have a student model, which contains university model, which contains address model. And we need to render the table, which looks like this, which contains student name column, university name column, and country name column. That is how our solution will look like for this concrete case. And you already can notice the disadvantage of the approach we used, because this one can look a little bit terrible for deep nesting. It looks like a pyramid of hell. But you can make it a little bit better using computed fields. Please beware that Vue doesn't allow to create a sync computed field. But in this case, it's possible. You can create getter computed field with getProperty method inside, and it will work. Guys and girls, maybe you have any questions, or is everything clear?
I have a question. GetProp function should accept a second parameter as promise.
Yes, of course.
So model is a promise at a
certain no, excuse me, no. Model is a model which we already have. We already got a student list, but student list contains that nested model. Every student has university model inside of it as a reference, and every university model has an address model as a reference. So the model is not promised, but everything you get from the getProperty method is a promise.
Okay, so what about second like set column where is get prop called. So it returns promise, as I get correctly. Or
You're right.
So get prop is has kind of overload, you know, how to say it.
Yeah. I understood. It can work with promises, correct? To make nesting possible, yeah, it must can work with promises.
Okay, I'm not sure if I saw it in the previous example, so I needed to ask it.
Because we haven't, because I haven't provided you with a get property method called listing. Yeah. It works just on the base of get model method. Okay, so we already talked about several cases of data rendering, about handling of referenced model, made sure that the reactivity is preserved. What about special operations mentioned at the beginning of this presentation? Yes, such operations as sorting. And you may see the word async sorting. Why do we have async sorting? Because unfortunately, array sort method can work with regular comparators only, but not async ones. Method get model always returns the promise, even if data is already loaded. So as downside effect, we need something like async version of sort method. Well, yeah. Pay attention that it doesn't mean that we are going to sort the data while it's loading. It's just because we have the promises instead of simple values to compare. Just the same situation we have for filtering and for search. Again, array filter method will not work because our filter returns promises. So we need a async version of filter and a async version for search. These three operations can make you have some doubts about our solution, but make them run away. We still have a lot of benefits. Our tests has proven that async sorting and search and filtering aren't slower than usual ones. So great. What the advantages do we have? We still have reference handling. We still have standard interface for get and fetch operations, and comfortable work with list, table, and other read-only data. From other side, we have it not very suitable for editable data because we need to implement change merge mechanism. And it's really, well, it's strange, even hard to imagine how are you going to edit the data while the data isn't still loaded. Yeah, usually user waits for the data and then start editing it. Okay, and as we have just some alternative to VIF, which is not good and is not bad. So actually, this is it. So at the end, I want to say that it's not like a prescription. It's some unusual, as I started, I said that it's some unusual way of data loading and data rendering using caching and lazy loading. So you can use it or you cannot, as you wish. Dear colleagues, maybe you have any questions or ideas? Or...
I have two questions.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for presentation, by the way. Was really interesting. And the first question is about experience of using this. Was it on real project?
Well, for now we are preparing it for production, but yeah, it was the idea of one of our architects, and well, it was dictated by the idea that we, for some purpose, I don't know, he doesn't like VIF directive, and yeah, we decided to move that functionality for handling the errors and handling the loading component somewhere outside into the global components. So it's it is prepared for production, but it wasn't tested on production yet.
So I wanted to ask here, why doesn't backend control the joins, like model in the model, or it takes too much time on backend? And
Understood. Yeah, because the provider of data is an API, and API tries to minify the response. Yeah, so it will give you the minimal necessary information. If you want some details, you're gonna make another one request. So that is the idea. Like,
okay. So it would call next request on some event, like
correct.
Oh, okay, great
If
idea.
you need additional data, you load that like manually by yourself.
Okay, and another question, could you please show the first code example, the largest one? And maybe I am incorrect, please correct me. Do you make a structure of data like a tree? So you join the model inside another one?
Correct. Yeah. Here you can see that. Yeah. Please continue.
But why don't you make it in a flat structure like database and leave the links like ID for another, and that's all. And then by Vuex you can quickly select it, especially if it's not a simple list, but you know, k-value structure like ID links to the full model. So I think it would be faster and easier to get cached data in another parts of application.
Excuse me, I didn't get, I'm not sure if I get the question right. You're asking, why didn't we do the structure of the store flat? Or what?
Yes, flat, like you have university in one property of a state and cities in another, and then select it in needed.
We could, but well, the modularity is a great idea and a great approach. We want to use it to make, well, at least to try to make some modules, I mean, some features isolated from each other. Yeah, because in other case, we'll have like the very, very large store, and really, I'm not sure if it will work if you just remove some part. For example, if you remove the let's say you said we should have university list in the state in the on the first level. Yeah, we should have address as a list here. Well, I think it's just another one approach, but it's not modular, and there can be some troubles in if we want to make changes in one part of our store and preserve other parts of our stores from change. Yeah.
I have experienced that did not provide kind of issues you described, but I think, okay, it's just opinion, so not important. I just wanted to understand why you join model on front end, because
well, the previous version of the same API was to nest models on the backend, and it led to some issues. For example, when you need to merge a new version of domain and old version of domain, it was a little bit difficult. So maybe for this purpose, the another one experiment was to completely separate it and hold only references for the models.
Yeah, but you are not able to clean main model from additionally loaded, you know? So you,
what does it mean?
To clean main model like university, you need to clean from universities. Oh, no, to clean university from cities, you need to map all universities.
Didn't catch, excuse me.
Okay, we can talk if you want in private messages, I think, if it is important.
Okay.
But I get answers for all my questions, and thank you for that.
Always welcome.
Yeah, Also, I have several questions here. Great presentation, great approach, and might take a place in some projects, but I see several cons here. You had a slide where you're setting loading string into your model. Can you go to it?
Is this one?
Not that exactly, where you
Oh,
have the
default value.
default value,
Understood.
correct. Yep.
Here it
Yep,
is.
previous one. So here I see the next issues with that. At the same, this exactly the point of time we have inconsistent in data. For some reason, model contains strange string, magic string name loading, which is really not our model. How you deal with it in the project, and why it should be set as loading, because we are expecting to have the exactly correct name here. And
Understood.
the second question here, if you working correctly with your types, for example, if you title your view with TypeScript, correct? So you're setting that default string into name, and name is a string. But if you want to put the placeholder for the whole model, for example, if you have the object itself initially, but you want to put the loading placeholder until you have the full object. So following that logic, you need to put the name, the loading instead of object, and how it works with types. Did you catch it?
Yeah, I think I've get it. Okay, so the first one question was about inconsistent data. I mean, the inconsistency is that you have that loading value for all the university rows. I mean, for all the students, or I didn't get where do we have inconsistency?
For at some point of time, if we have our Vuex store and we investigating or debugging our code, we see that our university name is loading. For me, it's quite strange to have the university name as loading.
Well, I'm not sure if you even see this, because as you may have seen on the previous slide, that only component cached model will have that name loading just for a short period of time. But if you are debugging Vuex, you'll see the empty array, and then you'll see the full array and with appropriate data, with consistent data. So that name loading exists only in, let me show it to you, in component cache. But when the data, I said that when the async operation is finished, it's just the same data which is in the store. But first, it is like the default data you provided to get property method. So, well, you will do some efforts to find that loading string. But if you debug in the store, you'll always have a consistent data in the store.
Yeah, I got it. I'm asking from the terms of data consistency and exactly from the perspective that the key should consist the correct data of value, but not the loading.
Oh.
It's just the pros of that.
Understood.
Of that
Understood.
approach. Yeah.
Understood. Okay, it's just a placeholder. So in our project, it's okay to have something like this until the data is loaded, because we want to show at least something. Well, in general, we not very often use the default values. So in most cases, you will see that there is no data, but then when the data is loaded, it's appeared. That is how we use it. Okay, the second one question. Could you please remind me?
Yeah, how you can deal with types, with different types, when you need to set the default string loading for the object.
Understood. You're asking about if we can place just a string loading instead of that object, if like all the data is loaded.
Yep.
No, we can't. No, we can't, because this method preserves us from doing this. If you can provide it with with a mock for a model you are going to fetch. And only this way it works. Because you're going to take the name field as a result, and this object will provide you with exactly the same model. I mean, exactly the same structure of a model. So you cannot take anything that there is no in this model. I hope I've clarified.
I got one more question, if I have them. It's simple. This placeholder loading is defined once at all projects?
No, of course. You can define it wherever you want, because we use, you may see that we have component cache for every concrete component. So you can provide you the default value for any component you want. So no.
If some new designer will ask us to make some loader instead of text, we would need to change any action.
Provide the loader instead of text. Well, yeah, it doesn't.
Or if loads instead of.
No. Yeah, if you want to use loader, something like that animation you've seen on a slide with example, you need to use VIF. But this proposal supports only text.
Well, it's kind of hard code, in my opinion, so it's a dangerous solution, I think.
Really depends on your UX and on your requirements for your application. Yeah. Because I'm not sure that UX can like change significantly. So if you have some strict business style, I'm not sure if it will be changed like dramatically to I don't know, to something really different.
Well, UI is changed once a few times per life of the project. It's like definition.
Yeah, but again, I don't know. Well, I work on my project at about 8 years, and well, there was no such significant changes of UX, because it's like a business application, and there is no place in business application for some cartoons. I don't know, for some animations or like that. It's a business application.
Okay, understand.
Mm-hmm. But you're right. If you have a UI UX which can be changed dramatically, well, maybe it's not a solution, a very good solution for that case.
Yeah, if you are able to generalize this solution to a case that I proposed, it could be created like a library, you know, and share it between all sort of project at least, and I think it would have some success.
Okay. Guys and girls?
I have a question. Have you considered the performance implications of your solution, and do you have in mind any solutions to prevent data flooding, server flooding by API calls?
You mean when we have a large amount of data, we need somehow to clean the store? For now, no, we didn't take that into account because, well, yeah, we even didn't reach that point. Great catch, thank you. Performance implication, I've already told that, well, yeah, you might think about large tables, yeah? And if we have separate requests for every row, it will be a little bit not optimal. Yeah, for this case, we need to load data like in bulk. We need to make fetches like to fetch the data in groups. I mean, if we have different students and different universities, we'll have as many additional requests for universities as we have rows in student table. Yeah. In this case, you should load data in bulk, and we have an ability to do that. we created, well, we little bit adopted method get model, which can do that. So for now, we took care about performance implication just on this level, but we didn't do anything for large amounts of data on a client.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any questions, guys? Sorry.
You're welcome.
I think this is no.
I wanted to show you this one.
Okay. Okay, in this case, thank you everyone to join our meeting. See you next.